Welcome. I would just like to make a comment and a note about what this event is. First off, this event is set up and really designed to discuss the cannabis industry in terms of the legalized cannabis industry. We are not here to debate, to support, to oppose in any way, shape, or form Ohio Issue 3. With that, we're here to talk about sort of just the national issues that relate to the cannabis industry. We have some individuals here that are actually operating legal grow facilities in the state of Washington to talk about their experiences a little bit, to provide some economic data, to provide some accounting data and some business data on the field. And with that, we welcome any questions towards the end that you guys would be interested in. So, all right, thank you. Now I get to sit over here, I guess, and kind of switch it up all of a sudden. If you want, we'll start off in which I'll have Rachel. You want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background, and we'll just kind of go down the table.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cooper. I am with Monkey Grass Farms. We are a Tier 3, which is one of the largest grow operations in Washington State. We are located right in the middle of Washington, central Washington, which is a very deserty, warm climate, in the summer at least. And my background is in marketing and sales, and I got into this industry. Monkey Grass was actually my dad's brainchild, and he and my mom, when they started, said, "Hey, we need your help." And I was a little hesitant at first, to be honest, but I joined, and I haven't looked back since. It's been a lot of fun. So.
I'll go kind of introduce myself again. My name is Justin Breidenbaugh. Just give a brief background about how I got involved in this industry, which I think is always the big question that's out there with anybody that gets involved in this industry. It was truly pure chance, to be honest, in terms of how I got involved in this. It was actually about 2 years ago, approximate, that I was approached by somebody in business who kind of brought out this idea of if they were to work within the cannabis industry in the state of Ohio, actually, and provide some ancillary services and support services to the industry, how would they do that? What would that look like? Can they even do it? What's the tax effect? What's the legal effect? At that point, I answered truthfully and said, I have absolutely no clue. As an accountant, I never thought that I would ever be looking into that topic, ever. So with that, I said, give me a few days, in which that was naive of me to say, in which I said, give me a few days, let me do some research, let me look into it, I'll see what I can find, provide some information, and go from there. After a couple days, I felt like my brain was going to explode in terms of looking at some of the federal laws, looking at some of the state laws, looking at different state laws compared to Ohio in terms of interstate commerce, how you would even set up these transactions, how you would deal with the tax effect. It was very unique and very challenging to me from an accountant standpoint and a CPA standpoint to really figure out how you're going to navigate these issues in the industry for states that do decide they want to legalize. At that point, it kind of turned into a lot of sleepless nights. My wife can attest to that, and with that, she's here tonight, and I appreciate her supporting me through this, because with that, it's been a lot of conversations and a lot of sleepless nights on my part of trying to wrap my head around this. I got to a point where I said, I really just want to understand the industry more. I want to figure out how people are going to deal with this and how they're going to navigate it. So it turned into attending some conferences, doing some research behind the computer, doing it in a way that I saw to be sort of just safe and secure from my standpoint of being a licensed CPA, not understanding the effects on me if I were to get involved in the industry. In which, after that, it answered some questions. I felt like every time I talked with somebody, it just created more questions and got me more curious. So at that point, I actually spent last summer and traveled out to Washington and met with Steve and met with Rachel and about 8 other growers and 5 processing companies that extract oil from cannabis, and then also met with about 5 retailers in the industry and trying to understand all these different business effects that they're dealing with in these situations. So it's really just sort of out of chance that I got involved in it, and it's been unique research and really challenged what I used to think from a theoretical perspective in terms of how to do business. So it's been very unique.
Well, thank you. I'm Steve Walser, and I'm the managing partner for Buddy Boy Farms, which is also a Tier 3 grower in Washington State. We were licensed on the 18th of April 2014, which was the first year one could become licensed. I think we were about the 13th licensed to grow in the state of Washington. It's an offshoot and it exists on I've got a fairly large organic farm. I've been an organic farmer for pretty close to 40 years. So for me, it's another crop, although it's a fairly profitable crop, it's still another crop, and I treat it as such, trying to maximize opportunity and minimize risk. We've been successful so far. It's an interesting challenge because it's a very highly regulated business. We also happen to have a small winery on our farm, so we're learning the federal and state regulations on that, along with the state regulations on cannabis. And that's been kind of an interesting ride because before that, we'd never been involved in a regulated industry, and this one is very highly regulated. So there's quite a learning curve to get ahead of the state and stay there, hopefully.
All right, at this point, we'd like to kind of go through and answer some questions that some students have submitted. These are ones that they found to sort of be intriguing when they were thinking about the industry and what's out there. So with that, we'll start with the first question with, what were some of the biggest surprises that really you didn't expect when entering into the marijuana industry? With that, I'll let the two people here kind of open it up to them and let you guys talk about that piece of it, and then I can talk about what I've seen and sort of some of the biggest surprises that caught my eye, at least looking into it.
One of the biggest surprises for me and our business partners was when we entered the industry. You kind of have this idea of, it's probably just a bunch of stoners or potheads, but a lot of our partners, our retail partners, were very smart business people. They were doctors and lawyers, people who were already very successful in other professions, basically getting into this industry because they saw it as a great way to make more money and also be part of something new and exciting. So that was one of my biggest surprises.
I think for me, we didn't have a lot of surprises agronomically. We didn't find marijuana to be a particularly difficult crop to grow, and having a farming background helped quite a bit because we were able to plan ahead and try and stay ahead of the curve with it, as you always have to do in any kind of a field crop. But I think I didn't anticipate how many changes and how fast the changes were going to come under regulation. The state of Washington has gone through several very dramatic revisions to the rules since they first set them out, and some of them to me were very unexpected. I just thought they would be a little bit more cautious than what they've had. I don't think that they've managed it in a bad way. In fact, I think they've actually, given the situation, managed it in a very good way. But you have to really be on your feet to take advantage of them and to stay ahead of them. I think the other thing that probably we've got a grow team that works for us, how stubborn they are. The growers that come out of the marijuana industry tend to think that theirs is the only way you can do this thing, and they just don't want to listen to data. So it's been kind of an interesting thing to try and get the grow team to go along with, well, wait a minute, let's do an experiment here and see how it actually works. Because there is no data out there. With most crops, agronomically, you can look up a lot of stuff. You can find out how much nitrogen you ought to put on corn and when, and all that stuff. There's nothing like that for marijuana. So you pretty much are running a little experimental farm of your own and trying to discover things.
I agree. It's been a year of trial and error and a lot of failures. But yeah, I agree with that.
That's, to me, I think that was one of the big surprises that I saw when I visited Washington last summer. I obviously went out with a lot of expectations and ways that I thought the industry was operating, and found out that I was completely wrong in that. I was amazed with how many businesses were kind of doing these trial and error methods. With that, there's a lot that have been very successful and have done well. I give kudos to those businesses that have done well, but with it, I think it's taken a lot of business knowledge and industry knowledge where they've taken industries that are closely related to this industry. So with that, with Steve and Rachel, in terms of having people that understand how to grow this, but then also just how to harvest it. We were kind of talking earlier the other day about, I met with a lot of growers that surprised me with how much crop they were able to grow, and they actually never thought about harvesting it. It was sort of this, we have it, now what? In which 20% of it would get harvested, and then 80% would actually just be trash at that point. They couldn't harvest it in time. It's extremely costly to do that, and the problem in this industry is the tax effects from a federal standpoint is very unique. When I went out to Washington, my thought was to really understand this industry from an internal control standpoint and look at the cash effects on the business and understanding how businesses were really securing their cash if they couldn't find banking, which we'll get into here a little bit later. What I really started to understand more of, though, was the federal tax effect and the state tax effects in terms of excise tax, how this was really putting a significant pinch on businesses that didn't understand how to operate. I found some that were profitable. I found a lot that were actually upside down and underwater in terms of the way they were operating. One of the examples I kind of give to my students is most companies are taxed on profit. With that, in this industry, you're not taxed on profit, you're taxed on what's called your gross profit, your gross margin. You don't get to deduct things in terms of your labor, in terms of your salaries, the wages, your insurance, your rent. So you pay the tax man first, and then after that, whatever's left goes kind of to operations. But what I found was without taking taxes into effect, you had a lot of businesses that showed a profit of, just to give a random number, showed a profit of $300,000 in that first 6 months of operations, which I would say most people in business would go $300,000 in 6 months. That's great when you're the only owner, you have a couple owners and it's split. The problem is when you actually look at the tax owed on that, it would be about $400,000 to $500,000. It kind of became this issue of, wait a minute, you mean we're working hard and we're actually producing some income, but we have to pay more out in terms of that. So it was really unique to see that setup and how many companies I met with that were sort of in that upside down position. And then you start talking about other things like bankruptcy and if you're going to close down because of that. And then you're into the issue that bankruptcy is a federal protection and you can't file for bankruptcy in this industry because of that. There was unique federal laws that were out there that really surprised me, where I kind of thought this stuff will get figured out as it goes, and it really hasn't gotten figured out yet, at least to this point. So you really have to know what you're doing in this industry. That's kind of been the biggest surprise, that it's not something that's by chance. You have to really understand your market, the consumers, the operations, all of that. There's not a lot of room for error, and if it is, it's got to be quick and fixed. So it was very unique from that standpoint. So want to build on anything else that I've mentioned, or pops
No,
out?
I think you said it very well, but there are a lot of pitfalls, that's for sure. There are anything from growing, and like you said, harvesting. I guess that's one of the things that served us well, is that if you've ever had a hay crop out in the field and the storms are coming in, you realize you better have your poop in a group when it comes to harvest. So we figured that out ahead of time with the cannabis, that we had to experiment, we had to devise, because there's no off-the-shelf remedy, and you can't go down to John Deere and say, get me a cannabis harvester, I need one by, in 6 months. You figure it out yourself, and you design it yourself, and that's what we did. We just built our own facility specifically designed to do that, and to experiment around for a while to do it. But it's an interesting challenge because of that, that's for sure.
It was unique to meet you from a growth side of how many people I met with in terms of the 10 growers. Every single one was doing it differently. And that's what kind of amazed me, that in most industries, I feel like there's a process that's sort of been figured out and set up, in which once you kind of figure it out, everybody kind of does it the same way. There's a little bit of a difference here and there, but overall it kind of has the same feel. Everybody was doing it very different, and with that they had very different results, some catastrophic. There's people that I met with over the summer that I've tried to contact now, and I know they're out of business. They're just not there. They can't handle it in terms of the business side of it. There's others that are doing very well, but it's been very unique from that standpoint, that it seems like everybody kind of has their own secret in terms of growers and what they think they're doing, and that their way is the best way, and it's going to produce the best quality plants or the best product that's out there. It's been really unique. So with that, another question that was given to us by students is, have you been able to secure banking or insurance? If so, are cost and services different compared to what we would call a traditional business?
We're fortunate. We've got a credit union that started taking growers as clients, probably 3 weeks before we sold our first small sale. So we've had a banking relationship from day one. We don't borrow money, but that's personal choice, but then I don't think that they would loan us any either in this industry. But so that's never been an issue. It's definitely more costly. I think it costs us about $700 a month to maintain a bank account so that we can deposit the cash, because most of our clients pay us in cash. Insurance runs about double on a dollars per thousand basis for either liability or property, but it is available, although it's becoming less so because Lloyd's of London recently decided, who is our insurer currently, decided they were going to exit the U.S. market for cannabis insurance because of their fear of potential federal liability. So that will make it a little more limited and probably more expensive, but it's just the price of entry because the state requires that you carry a certain amount of liability insurance. We're in a fortunate position because my farming operation has certain coverages on buildings that they've allowed us to keep even though we're using them for cannabis, and that's very unusual, but I'm happy that they do.
We've also been very fortunate to have banking basically from the get-go, but it was a little bit different. I mean, we did have some of the bank administration heads, their attorney, come out and actually see our facility, meet with our owners, and do a walkthrough. They were trying to make sure that we were legit, you know? So that's definitely something different. You don't see that for most small businesses. We do pay quite a bit of money as well monthly for our banking, but it's worth it. It's nice to have, for sure. Dealing with cash would be a bit of a nightmare. So yeah.
In terms of the growers and processors and retailers, and I can talk about the processing and retail side a little bit and who I've seen in that industry. From a banking standpoint, it's been unique. There's some that have been very lucky that I met with that they found banking right away. Most of it's been through credit unions. Major banks are definitely not doing this. I did meet with a couple growers that, surprisingly enough, told me that they were actually banking with large national banks. With that, when I asked them, do the banks know that what you're doing in terms of operations, most of them said, I highly doubt it. They're sort of hiding what the business structure is, or it's under a different name or something that doesn't really correlate to the industry so much, and they're just sort of going, well, we'll wait until the bank finds out and then we'll take that next step if the account's frozen or whatever it may be. What was unique to me and what I found the banking side of it and from the insurance side was the cost of this compared to traditional businesses, just how expensive it was. It's been a wide range of fees. I talked with some businesses in which they are paying application fees of anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 just to apply for an account. It's not even going to give them an account for sure, it's just to apply. So if they don't get it, that's $10,000 down the drain right away. With that, some of them then pay monthly fees, in which I've heard some as low as $500, which to me is somewhat reasonable in terms of a business bank account. Others upwards of $5,000 a month in what they're paying to be able to just maintain the account. And then a lot of the retailers and processors that are much more heavy in cash, they're also paying fees in terms of their cash deposits anywhere from 0.5% to 1% every time they make a cash deposit. And it's something where they just can't go in and make a deposit that day. So it's not something you can walk in with your brick of money in terms of some of these retailers and what they'll have sitting around. You have to go in at a scheduled time during a week, during the month, have an armed car service or security service do this, which was very expensive for many of them. So that to me was sort of unusual to see in a business structure, just how expensive this was and what credit unions are sort of doing in terms of taking on the risk to do this also. With the banking side, a lot of this is limited due to the fact that most banks are afraid that if they were to bank in this industry, the federal government would come in and freeze assets and shut them down from that stance. So they're taking risks to do this. So I don't kind of blame banks in terms of what they're doing with that. It makes perfectly good sense from a risk standpoint, especially being the former auditor, that's all I look at every day is risk and kind of what's going on. But it was really strange and just sort of awkward to see these fees that were being charged for this type of business and how they were handling. From a retail standpoint, it was unique. To me, there's been a lot of innovation from a cash handling standpoint. I actually met with a lot of retailers that I never really thought about this and how to do it, where a lot are operating their own ATMs on site. So most of them bring in cash. They keep it in a safe. Some of it they do deposit in banks if they can find a bank that will take it, but they actually feed their own internal ATMs. So most of them will do cash-only transactions, and the idea is if you come in to purchase an item, you have to go up to the ATM, use your debit card, and then at that case, what will happen is your money will be wire transferred to their bank account immediately. They give you their own cash. You go up to the register, buy your product using their own cash, and they're just basically cycling their cash through in terms of this ATM system to try to keep some cash on hand, but really to create more electronic transactions to do this. To me, it was fairly innovative. I couldn't think of an industry that I've seen where they kind of feed their own ATM and do this on an everyday stance. So it was kind of unique.
You know, I'd like to say that it was, going back to the first question about anything surprising, that was one of the surprising things. It's kind of odd, maybe not surprising, but odd. And the one we hadn't thought about was just that it is a cash business primarily from the retailers. And you're walking into this little bank all the time with these huge paper bags or whatever full of cash. So you'll come in with $40 or $50 or $60,000 just on a regular basis. The bank's great with it. They're really friendly and nice and all that, but it just feels odd. And you're kind of worried, you know, as you're driving down the road thinking, I don't know, I got all this cash in here. But, you know, so far it's actually been a very pleasant experience because the bank we have is very, very friendly, very nice and easygoing. And there really haven't been any crime issues in the industry that I've ever heard of with it, which we kind of expected. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention is we're finding now that actually our employees are having a hard time getting loans, such as car loans or even a home loan, because the banks aren't counting their income from a marijuana grow or retail location as actual income. So that's definitely something that, you know, we're going to look more into in Washington and dig deeper. So that our employees do have the ability to do those things. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was surprising to me, actually, just talking the past couple of days that I never thought about. I've been looking at it from a business perspective, and then to hear that employees that, you know, whether it's a grow site or a processing site or a retail site, that they're having problems getting banking because the same thing, in which the banks will ask for proof of income when it comes to getting these loans, and they're going, well, that's coming from an illegal business federally in terms of their eyes. So with that, they won't give out the loans for that. And it's created some unique situations now to a personal level outside the business side in terms of hiring employees even, which we'll kind of talk about here a little bit too. But it's been very unique, very different. With that, another question we had was, do you find it difficult to find quality employees, which kind of then leads into that question. How do you vet prospective hires in your business?
I would say yes and no. You know, especially in the beginning, we had a lot of people apply that I felt were way overqualified. You know, a lot of people with degrees, and I was just hiring general labor, you know, type of positions, you know, working in the garden, transplanting, harvesting, trimming, that kind of stuff, packaging, processing, you know, and we had people with degrees, and they just were so excited to work in the industry and be a part of something revolutionary, really. But it's also not as glamorous as a lot of people think it is. And so I think they find that out pretty quickly. So yes, you know, we find our gems for sure. We've had people that have stuck it out with us for the last year and a half and have been great employees and have literally taken pay cuts to come work for us. But usually I just put them through a regular, I accept resumes and then interviews. I actually have some interviews on Friday when I get back, about 10 people. So anyways, yeah, it's usually just a normal type of vetting process for employees.
Yeah, I'd have to second that. It's been interesting, the people that do come, because people do think that it's a new industry they want to get involved in, and so you do tend to get people that are overqualified, I'd say, and a lot of people coming along that want to work in the industry. So we haven't had an issue finding employees. Most of the work is relatively tedious, although when you get into some of the, you know, if you're on the grow team or management of one sort or another, of course, there's more to it. We do basic background checks, take out an employment application. We're a rural area, and so often we know of the person that might be coming, so that kind of narrows the field a little bit. But it hasn't been a problem for us.
Most of the growers that I met with, I think a lot of it depends on their location. As I've talked to the two up here, there's some locations that I visited when I was out in Washington that were, as I would call it, in the middle of nowhere. You're driving on some gravel roads and down into some valleys in which UPS won't even deliver there. As they kind of told me, UPS would deliver on the side of a road and they would have to go pick it up at one point during the day to get their packaging, in which they said, that was tough for them because they tried to locate it in areas in which it made sense for them, but they didn't think about in terms of hiring employees that they don't want to drive out that far, especially if there's not a lot of residential areas. So with that, there was a lot of turnover that was occurring, which obviously, as most people know in business, that creates a heavy cost and a heavy burden from a business perspective. What I've seen on the retail side really is kind of the same thing. I think there's, again, some good and bad in terms of trying to find quality employees and maintaining those employees. I look at it almost as you would in terms of the bar industry, in which you need to find somebody that understands your product and understands what you're selling, but is not using to a point in which they can't do their job. I think you have a lot of people that I've seen, at least on the retail side, that were very excited to be in the retail environment. Part of the excitement to be in the retail environment was because they're heavy users, and with that, they kind of look this as, I'm going to get a discount, I'm going to use. Others get into it because they're just interested in it and they want to get into it. What I found on the retail side was there's a lot of education that occurs, which really surprised me also from the business structure. A lot of the retail sites that I sat in over the summer would kind of spend a few hours just sitting there watching at customers come and go. There was more time spent one-on-one with customers providing education on the products, what the products will do, what they won't do. There's a lot of misinformation, it seems like, that's out there. I'm one in which, I didn't understand what really the product does or certain strains or anything like that. So I kind of got schooled on that when I visited over the summer. But with that, most consumers didn't really know what they were buying, in which I have to look at as you have a consumer coming in paying a significant amount of money for something, which I think is kind of a significant amount of money, in which they don't want to get something that they're not going to like. So you want to make sure the consumer's happy, they're going to come back. You need knowledgeable employees to do that. You need people that know what they're selling and can talk to the employee about that. Some that have used and can describe, whether it's effects or anything like that. But with that, in terms of, working hours, off hours, making sure they're reliable employees. I talked with a couple retail sites that I met with when I was out there and then when I got back. And it was unique to find that a lot of the people that I met with and talked to had been fired within a month's time. And I talked to theirs and say, well, what happened? They said, well, this person went out on break. They decided that they were going to go out and smoke a little bit, or they were going to ingest an edible or something, in which they just couldn't perform their job based on the duties that were required of them. So it was unique to me that there's this balance right now where you need to find knowledgeable individuals, in which I think when you're going from a black market to a legal market, that becomes unique because you have people that have been obviously doing it in a black market environment to understand it. But then to keep those employees and keep them happy, and that's the other part of it too. There seems to be a lot of turnover in terms of the pay rates and what they're getting paid, just the overall work environment. So that's been kind of unique from that standpoint from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that too. It's kind of an interesting, funny sidelight is that our grow team, for example, they were major stoners, these guys that all been growing on the black market, and they whew. And at first we thought, well, we were a marijuana business, we can't not let them smoke. So we did. And then after a while, it kind of got, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea from a liability standpoint. So we started restricting it at work. And over a year's time, without exception, every one of those growers stopped smoking pot on their own. We didn't require it. They just decided that, this is a real business, and we've got to treat this like a real business if we're going to continue to have a job, because I'm serious about business. If I'm going to be involved in it, it's got to work the way it's got to work. And so I tried to impart them to that, and they kind of got with the program. Every one of them figured, I just can't focus if I'm smoking pot all the time. They came to that conclusion. They quit doing it on their off hours, at work hours, at any hours. I thought that was, it was kind of gratifying to see that they were willing to sacrifice what had been a major part of their life in order to really concentrate and make sure the business ran well.
Yeah. One thing I was going to add too is in Washington, we actually aren't allowed to have internships either. So that was something a little bit different than most normal businesses are, they can have interns come in and work. Well, we can't in the marijuana industry in Washington. So that's kind of a bummer because these are people, college students such as yourself that want to learn, and we have the opportunity to teach people, and so it's kind of a bummer in that way, in that regard. But yeah, so that was just something different than what normal business have.
And one thing that I think note also with employees in these sites is that just like with the age requirements of most states, you can't use unless you're 21 and up. You also can't step foot on these sites unless you're 21 and up. There is an age restriction there, so this isn't something where you have a 16-year-old in high school that's getting a summer job that's coming into work. That does limit some of your labor workforce a little bit. I think about Ohio from a standpoint of just understanding agriculture in the state at least, where you have a lot of farming families and they hire their kids to help out with the farming in the summer. I thought it was unique when we were kind of talking earlier and about if you have younger kids that are high school age that would want to work in your industry, they can't. With that, they are restricted until they're 21 to actually work within the industry. So that was one of the things kind of unique, I think, in terms of a labor-intensive industry and in terms of agriculture. You see a lot of youth that want to get involved in that and kind of help with that, but they just can't. So.
My grandson, who is 8 years old and lives on the farm, thinks that we raise frogs inside that big black fence.
So with that, are there any special quality controls, or I'm sorry, I skipped one. So going back, so what types of customers do you see being serviced by this industry in terms of age, gender, income level? Are there any things that you see that, and just in terms of the customers overall, is there a certain type, that you're marketing towards, or that seem to be, just buying product, whether it's certain shops that are aimed at certain individuals or who you're selling to, anything like that?
Well, my experience going around to the stores, because we have to deliver, and we deliver pretty much on a weekly basis. So in the first weeks and months, I did some deliveries, my partner did some before we hired regular drivers, but in seeing the people there, it was, I would say, primarily middle-aged and up patronizing the stores. That's changing a little bit. I think the crowd's getting a little bit younger, and particularly now in Washington State, we had it wasn't a legal medical marijuana system. It was an illegal one, but it was one that just was allowed because of some legislative history that is just very strange and involved to go into. But the case was that there were a lot of medical shops in Washington State, hundreds of them in Seattle, for example. And most of the younger people, young, healthy medical marijuana patients, were going to those medical marijuana shops. And the older people were, probably not smoking too much anymore. So when the recreational thing happened and all these shops opened, it was mostly people, 40 years old and on up. I mean, you'd see people in line. In the early days, there were lines outside those shops, and they'd be 80 years old, standing in line to go in and buy some weed. But I think as they're shutting down the medical, because that's what they're doing in Washington State, they're rolling medical into recreational and making it all one large system, which is a really good idea from my perspective, because they're actually going to regulate that side of it. You're seeing younger people come into the industry because they're leaving the medical shops, are closing up one by one, and recreational is the only place to get the supply.
Yeah, I see it all across the board. I mean, it's actually really surprising. You see people, 21 years old, young people, especially now, because prices have gone down in the recreational market. But you also see, your baby boomers in there buying marijuana as well. So, and a lot of them haven't used it in years, and they say, well, what do we get? And so it's people are coming out of the closet a bit, I think, and so yeah, we really see all over men, women, and different age groups.
A lot of professional people, a lot of teachers, because previous to it being legalized in the state, they could not risk using it, or being caught, or buying from the wrong person. And now it's just like anything else. So you see a lot of, my sister-in-law happens to be a teacher, and all of her friends are very avid customers.
Yeah. Well, I think people have more confidence. It's now a safe, regulated, tested product. So I think that people feel more comfortable. They're not buying it out of a trunk. They're going to a very clean, well-lit, beautiful storefront to purchase products. So.
And there are some amazing stores. People have really used a lot of creativity in what they've done. I mean, you've got anything from little hole in the walls to just beautiful, really unique places with art glass in them, or a lot of electronic media showing the product and talking about it. It's really quite an interesting experience.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of the stores are almost like an Apple Store experience. You go to an iPad and you order and you have somebody there helping you pick out what you want. So it's a very one-on-one experience.
Yeah, that's what I found most of the retail shops that I visited in terms of this past year is, and I've kind of seen different areas, so it wasn't, one large city and then, or just a rural area to kind of see some diversity in there. It was really unique to sit there for hours and watch customers come in. I was surprised by that. I really expected this to be, sort of a certain look or certain image or a lot of 21-year-olds that were coming in. It really wasn't that. It was a lot of baby boomers from what I saw, in which it was people that I talked with, and most people were pretty open in talking with me, and I sat there and asked them about how long they've been buying the stuff and why they're purchasing it this way and have they ever used before, and some said they've used it 30 years ago and they quit, in which case now it's legal, and I thought, why not come in and see what it's about. You have others that are avid buyers, in which they're in there every week, and that's kind of their spot that they go to. There's others that come in which some of the owners I met with, they said it's kind of adults that are getting their weekend fix, just like they would go to Kroger or any other supermarket and get their beer for the weekend to watch a football game or whatever. They would go in and buy, whether it's flour to smoke, whether it's an oil to use it in a vaporizer, whether it's an edible to consume. It was just sort of their weekend thing that they would do to unwind or whatever they were looking to get out of it. It was a very diverse group of people from a consumer standpoint that I saw. But yeah, the one-on-one interaction to me was really unique, in which it felt, as Ray said, it kind of felt like you were going into an Apple store almost, that you would be greeted by somebody who would ask you what you were looking for. And there's a lot of people that came in and said, I have no idea. They said, this is my first time coming in here, and in which case it was more educational to try to get them to figure out what it is that they would want. And I think there's a lot of marketing that goes into that also, that you want to bring that consumer back. So that was kind of unique.
And a lot of people that are my age have discovered that some marijuana works for certain things. I mean, it works well. Going to sleep, people take sleeping pills. A lot of people are replacing them with smoking pot at night. And it seems, the right thing seems to just put them right to sleep. Other people, lotions and such, I mean, if you've got arthritis, and who doesn't have aches and pains when you get older, that stuff actually works. You put it on, you actually feel some relief. So as people are discovering this, you see a lot of older people coming in to self-medicate in a really pretty mild way.
Yeah. From a consumer aspect, it was unique to me when I talked to a lot of people, and I think it's just part of the market in general. I would ask a lot of recreational users just about the usage in general, and it was unique to me that a lot of people, they would make the comment, and I think this shows the uneasiness of going into a store to buy this product for the first time. Most would say, well, I'm buying this, but I'm using it for a medication purpose or a self-medication purpose. There kind of had to be a reason behind why it was. It wasn't, to me, about recreational for some. It was almost a way to kind of mask that they were doing it for recreational purposes, but they didn't want to say that. It's like, yes, when it's going in to buy a beer, it's like, well, I'm buying this beer because I have indigestion and it's going to make my stomach feel better, when they're just buying the beer to buy the beer. So it was unique to me that you had people that had to find that reason in a state that was now legalized, and it was there for recreational, and it's helping to bring that comfort level to the consumer of what they're buying and educating them on it. But yeah, it was interesting to me to talk to people, and I would say the majority that I talked to, probably 80%, they would always be followed up with, yes, I use, but I use for this reason. And I would ask, well, are you a medical user? Do you have a card? Well, no, but I use for this reason. So it was unique to me to see that from a consumer standpoint. With that, are there any special quality controls that you place or the government places on your product before it goes to market? I talked to one of the students that kind of created this question. I think their thought was, in terms of when a product goes out for resale, how is it tested by the government? Is it tested in-house to make sure it's a quality product in terms of pesticides, molds, what's being ingested, things like that? It's kind of what they were getting at with this question.
Well, I'll jump on that. Yes, it is tested in-house by our employees. So yeah, I mean, obviously you want to know that you're creating a quality product, and a lot of times you can't tell that just by looking at it. So we do, our employees do try it out and say, yeah, this is good, let's sell this. So some other things that we do for quality control is we actually take more time in the packaging and the processing as far as making sure that the product is trimmed well and it's manicured and it's, you know, it looks nice in the bag. And one of the biggest things is packaging. I think as far as a consumer standpoint, it's the way that you look at any type of product. You know, yeah, I like that bottle of wine because of the label on it. You know, it's the same thing with cannabis. People buy our products based on the packaging. So definitely we take a lot of time and thought into that. The state does make us have all of our products tested before it goes out to the market. Everything has to be individually barcoded with you know, obviously the barcode and then also the store name and UBI number for every single package. And quality control before the product actually goes out. One of the things is we create transport manifests, and these are basically manifests to let the state know, the LCB know, that we are transporting product to a certain store. So it tells them when we're going to transport it, what is being transported, and the exact number of packages that are being transported. So this is huge. You know, we don't have automated packaging and counting and sorting systems. So every single box that goes out, you know, you have to know the exact number of packages in there. So, you know, sometimes that means 1,000 packages have to be counted before they go out. And if you get to a store and you're off by one, that store actually has to refuse that order and you take it back and you have to make it right and take it back again. So there are definitely a lot of steps before that product gets to the shelf at the store. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, Washington State requires that we take a sample from every 5-pound lot. If you're dealing with the flower, you can't have more than 5 pounds in a bulk lot. And every one of those has to be sampled randomly, supposedly, and sent to a state-certified lab where they're tested for yeast and mold, total plate count, coliform bacteria, and gram-negative bacteria, I believe, plus THC and cannabinoids. And they have relatively strict requirements on each one of those 4 microbiological tests. If you fail any one of them, then none of that lot can be sold as flour. It can only be used for like oil or an extraction method, some method of further processing that will destroy whatever the microbiological contaminant that was found in there was. So only passed lots that pass all 4 criteria can be sold to the public. So that's one large quality control thing. In our own case, we tend to try and have a mini HACCP program where we look at each step along the way, because there's a lot of steps from the seed to the sale, and try and look at each one and see is there any possible source of contamination and where would those come from, and then try and make sure that we've designed a system that eliminates those possibilities. And so far, we've been relatively successful at that.
And THC, I might explain that too, just for anybody that's unfamiliar. That's the potency. So basically, like a glass of wine is, you know, 6 or 9% alcohol. It's the same. The potency of the marijuana is based on the THC.
One thing that I saw as being different from a quality control standpoint, which was just strange to me, was a retail shop can't call these guys up and just say, hey, we need our product today. We're going to order and bring it out. It has to sit in quarantine for 24 hours?
24 hours.
It has to sit in a 24-hour quarantine in which you have to have a safe, a locked room, an area in which your item is boxed up, it's been counted, it's been marked. And keep in mind, as Ray said, each individual package needs to be marked and barcoded to that retail site that it's going to be going to. So this isn't just something where you have packaging sitting around with products, and they can just say, okay, we need 1,000 units, throw them in a box and go. It's very time intensive in terms of marking this stuff from a quality control standpoint, but then it has to sit in a quarantine room for 24 hours. So I saw a lot of places where they would have boxes marked and it says, you know, do not touch until this date and this time to the minute. And then once that minute hits, they can then actually take it to the retail site. And a lot of that's so the state can come in terms of the regulators, and they can do a random check if they want to make sure everything's being marked correctly and it's being shipped to the right place, and that all the inventory is actually accounted for and being tracked. So that was sort of strange to me to see that, because I couldn't think of any other industry where I've seen that. The other one I know, Steve and I talked about actually during my visit, and I'd never thought about it, and it was sort of an interesting situation where there was I believe it was a grower that had used, you may remember this conversation, where they'd used a bamboo top on their product, in which it made it look very unique and different. So they had their packaging, it was a plastic packaging, it had sort of a bamboo top, everything was ready to go, it was all good for resale, and then the state came in and said, has that bamboo been tested for pesticides and herbicides and all this other stuff? And there was no documentation, in which all that packaging, trash. Because they didn't want any contaminants to get into the product itself. So it was unique to me that you have this marketing sense where people are putting together packaging and a look to it in which they want this to sell and stand out on shelves. People are going to see this and kind of gravitate towards it, but you don't think about the elements that are going into that packaging and how that could actually contaminate the product. So it was unique to me to hear that, because I couldn't even think of any situation where I would have ever thought about that, in terms of if somebody shows me, a bamboo top on a product to make it look better, I'd be like, oh, that looks great, run with it. And then the state comes in and says, well, we don't want contamination, and you have to trash it now, in which that's a lot of time and that's a lot of money.
Well, and that brings up, the state reportedly is looking at doing pesticide testing and instituting that. Right now, to my knowledge, they don't, but there are some public interest groups that are going around and randomly buying product and testing it, and there have been some pretty spectacular fails, particularly in Oregon and Colorado. I've apocryphally heard that have found some problems in Washington State, but nobody's publicized them as of yet. But it's something that's coming, and it's something that the consumer, when they start reading those headlines that 10 out of 12 samples had some unregistered pesticide on them, it gets their attention. So I think it's something that everybody that's producing marijuana is going to have to be aware of. They're going to have to be careful of, because it's just like anything else. If you have untested pesticides or unregistered pesticides on your product, it's a black eye for the industry.
Yeah. There's a case currently in Colorado, actually, that just came out recently, where it's two individuals that are actually suing, I don't know if it's the retail shop or the grower, but it's been found they used a pesticide product that is cancer causing, in which it wasn't tested for, it wasn't really known before that, and they found this out. So because of that now, there's a massive lawsuit. The two individuals have not, as of this moment, don't have cancer or anything, but they're saying, if we would have known that chemical was being used in terms of growing that product, it would have changed our buying habits, which we would have liked to know that. So I think it's unique as this happens that the regulations are trying to catch up to, in terms of quality control of what's going into the product, what's being ingested. It was, even as I talked to some students about this, at first they kind of looked at me and said, quality control, it's something you grow. And I said, well, think about it, if there's mold on this, that's mold you're ingesting, that's mold you're taking in. And then they kind of looked and went, that's disgusting. And it's like, well, that's kind of what we're dealing with here, some of the quality control checks that have to be figured out. So it's kind of different.
Yeah, and we have to include what pesticides we're using, and also what type of growing medium we're using. And with our extraction, we have to disclose, our extraction methods as well to every store with every delivery, so that if a customer does come up and say, well, how was this grown, or what was used on it, they can pull it out and say, this is how it was grown and this is what was used on it. So,
in terms of extractions, for those of you that aren't up on the industry or anything, what that extraction is doing is it's actually taking the flour, it's using gases, pressure, in which it's going into that product, that flour, and it's actually extracting the oils out of it. So if you think about, that oil is going to have, possibly contaminants in it due to the gases that are being used, the equipment that's being used. So there's a whole other testing method that's got to go into that to see what's happening with the extraction process.
And it concentrates anything that's in that flour.
Yeah.
So if you've got a pesticide contamination in there, it concentrates it in the oil that comes out. So you have to be particularly careful at that end.
With that, based off time, there are two questions left, in which we talked a little bit about the inventory tracking already, so we can kind of skip through that one. Then the last one kind of is, when it comes to the business, what do we believe the future will bring for the industry? I think what I'll do is we'll kind of stop at this point in terms of looking into the future, at least for right now, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions from the audience. With that, I do want to make a note in terms of questions that we are happy to answer any questions that anybody has. We do ask, for time's sake and to be fair to everybody, that if you have a question, to actually ask a question. With that, I've been to other events and seen panel discussions in which it seems like a lot of times it becomes a soapboxing moment of somebody giving a story or somebody they know or a personal experience, and then it becomes, okay, where's the question at in there? So just ask the question directly, in which we will answer it. We'll move through as many as possible. If we find that the question's not there, we will just move on to somebody else. With that also, as I want to make a note, we are not medical professionals who are up here. We're business professionals. We're not law enforcement. So if anybody has questions on the medical side of this industry or the societal effects in terms of law enforcement, those are things that we will not answer. That's for another panel. With that, myself and I know the other panelists agree that those are massive issues that need to be discussed and need to be figured out, but that's for other experts in their field to talk about. So I would not feel comfortable talking about that. It's outside of my scope of expertise, and I know it's outside the scope of the other panelists' expertise. So with that, we're not going to answer those pieces, but we are happy to answer whatever you want to ask.
All right, and I'm back here. I'm going to be running around. So when I get to you, just raise your hand or stand up. I'll come over to you. Let us know who you are, and then give us your question. So we'll start right here.
Oh, hey, what's up? I'm John. I just had a question about the system that's in place in Washington. Did you guys change your constitution to do that? And also, did you guys limit who can have commercial grow licenses?
No, we didn't have to change the Constitution. We've got an initiative process, which sounds like similar here. But no, there was not a change to the Constitution. As far as the rules, basically, no, we don't have a limit on the number of growers other than you had to qualify. And the qualifications were basically you had to demonstrate that you had sufficient funds from a legal source to be able to do whatever it is you were planning on doing, which we have 3 tiers in Washington State. We have a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3 grower. The tier 1 is limited to, what do they get, 1,000, 1,500 square feet? It's a very small area.
2,000.
2,000, yeah. So you don't need, it doesn't take a lot of money to be able to start off a tier 2 or a tier 1 outdoor grow. You basically need a little plot of land, someplace that's, not within 1,000 feet of a school or a daycare, whatever. Any kind of rural large lot, basically you could do it, and enough money to fence it, and then enough money to grow. Well, it doesn't cost a whole lot to start out growing, really, either. So really the Washington State system, one of the things I like about it, it's open to everybody, and there were 1,000 people or more. There are, I think, last I looked, 786 growers and processors in Washington State, and the grower-processor combination plus strict producers.
That have applied.
No, that have been licensed.
That have been
There's
licensed.
786 as of last week that have been licensed, and there's about another 180 or so that are pending licensing. There's quite a few.
Yeah, Washington took a very grassroots approach to the licensing for both grow and retail. And our grow application, I believe, was like $250, where some states are, they're charging about $100,000 to apply, just to apply. So, yeah, we were really fortunate. Pretty much anybody with a little bit of cash could hop into the business. So.
You have a lot of people that also jumped on the licensing in which they're selling the licenses also. So with that, they kind of got in early, and then now they're selling it to other individuals to pass that on.
Yeah, and I think there's pros and cons to that system. We've seen both the pros and the cons. One of the cons is, anybody with $250 could apply, which really, maybe they didn't really have the money to start a grow. It really bogged down the system quite a bit for the people who could actually fulfill their license. So.
Great, thank you. We have a student question up here.
Hi, my name is Bill George. I'm just curious about the consumer side of the market. You guys mentioned how the prices kind of dropped off since you guys first started, since it was first on the market. Just curious, working with all these people that have been involved in the black market maybe beforehand, have they given you any knowledge on how the legalization has changed the market for consumers in terms of price and quality and everything like that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's had a relatively dramatic impact on that. I live in northeastern Washington. It's a fairly rural area, and tell the truth, a lot of people up there were, in one way or another, involved in the black market, kind of like Northern California. I don't want to say a majority or anything like that, but there were just a significant number out there. And most of them have dropped out because, the black market was characterized by what we would now consider relatively small growers. I mean, they might grow 40 or 50 or 100 plants, and previously that provided a nice living. You might, make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in a year. It's all tax-free. Well, that's changed. The wholesale value of pot has gone down quite a bit because you've got operations like ours that are, larger. We're no longer having to do it in the shadows. We can do it a lot less costly, and because of the way the market has worked out, we're forced to do it less costly and sell it less costly, and those guys just can't really compete with that, so a lot of them have just quit growing.
With that too, at least when I kind of visited Washington, one of the things I asked most people, especially that were working in retail shops or in processing or producing in terms of growing, I'd ask if they've used, and then most of them would say yes, they're a user in some way, shape, or form. And I normally ask the question, where do you buy from? It was interesting to me, and the prices have changed drastically since I visited. It was very high prices back in the summer. It dropped quite a bit sort of right after I left, so I won't say I caused that or anything. So with that, there's a steep drop there. But what you found is a lot of people would say, well, they were still purchasing from their neighbor who maybe wasn't licensed, in which it was a little bit cheaper because they didn't have to pay the hefty excise tax. If you look at Washington, their excise tax has changed significantly. They had what was before a 25-25-25 system, is the way I describe it. There was a 25% excise tax from a grower to a processor. The processor then had to charge a 25% tax from them to the retailer. And then the retailer had to charge a 25% tax to the consumer. There's an automatic built-in 75% tax right away because that just goes into the consumer pricing. With that, prices were very high in terms of the retail price, and then you throw in a 75% tax plus any applicable sales taxes for the county. I mean, you're talking, now 85% maybe. A lot of people that were heavy users, I would say, would still go to their black market sources. As prices have dropped a little bit, I think people are now going more to the retail, is what you're seeing there. The other thing that's kind of unique, though, is that I think with the retail side, and I've kind of talked with both these people about, is that with that black market, you're getting into a market now where people want a certain quality. They want to pay money and know that what they're getting is actually good. However you want to define that in terms of a good product versus a bad product, but they want to know what they're paying for, I think, just like anybody else. So with that, they're starting to trust the retailers a little bit more because they're finding products that they trust. They're finding products that they know maybe work for them in terms of what they want to get out of it, where in the black market, I would say you don't always know what you're getting. So because of that, they're starting to trust the retail side more, and it's kind of becoming a consumer piece where they want to get what they're paying for. So you're seeing that change a little bit, but you still see the black market there, and a lot of it's due to the pricing piece, which comes back down to taxes and the business effects and creating efficiencies and keeping costs down.
Yeah, one way I know that we are starting to affect the black market is one of our stores that sells our concentrates. They had people going in and buying large amounts of our concentrates on a daily basis, and then actually created a Facebook account and was selling these products over a Facebook account. So we knew we were making, and don't get any ideas, but we knew we were making a dent in the black market when those black market sellers are buying our products from the retail locations and reselling them. So.
You see a big market now too in the concentrate market, in the edibles market. That's something that a black market individual is not going to be able to create as much. They're not going to have these large extraction machines sitting around their house. This is expensive machinery to buy this stuff. So it's one of those things where they want to keep their costs low. If they're growing out of their garage or out of their basement or their backyard or in the woods or whatever, they don't want to put a lot of money into it. But I think those types of products you're seeing a lot of users move towards that a little bit more also, which is changing the dynamics of the market a little bit. Colorado's unique because they do have a very heavy, what they call a gray market, with the self-growing aspect in there, because you're allowed to grow, but you can't sell to other people. But with that, you can gift it to other people. So it's creating a unique sort of gray market in there. But yeah, it's interesting dynamics from that standpoint.
Thank you. I know we have one up here.
Do I need to stand up? No. Oh, okay. I can stand up. It's not like I can't. I was just curious about your comment that you have to pay taxes on the your gross revenues and not on your net. Is that unique to cannabis, or why is that?
So it's unique to this industry in comparison to any other industry. What that actually came about was due to a law in the early 1980s in which there was a court case that took place in which you had an individual that was actually dealing in narcotics, heroin, drugs, a lot of different things. So what happened was, obviously he was arrested, in which case the way the Internal Revenue Code is defined and the way it's set up is that if you have income of any source, no matter what it is, you must report it for tax purposes unless the tax law says it's not income. So if all of a sudden, a plane were to come in here and drop money on everybody, you legally must report that. So what they said of this individual is because you have this income from illegally gotten gains, you must report that. It really goes back actually to the days of Prohibition. I mean, when you think about, you had a lot of the alcohol that was running around in terms of the mobsters, one of the ways the government went after them was for tax evasion. It wasn't because they were doing illegal activities, it was because they could get them on tax evasion and they had proof of that based off how much money they had sitting in an account or wherever else. So what happened was this individual, to kind of speed it up a little bit, the individual obviously was being taxed on it. That individual then fought the tax system, went to court and said, well, hey, if I'm getting taxed on my income, well, then surely I should be able to deduct my expenses for doing this. I should be able to deduct my gas. I should be able to deduct my scales, any employees, any rent that I'm paying, any insurance that I'm paying. If you're saying it's good for income, it should be good for expenses also. At that point, the courts came out and said, you know what, you're right, that's fine. After that, Congress did not seem to like that in terms of the early 80s, so Congress came out with a tax code section called 280E. What that says is if you are dealing in any Schedule I substance, in which marijuana is a Schedule I substance, you are going to be taxed at that level and not your profit. So all you can deduct is the cost of your inventory, but any sales you make, you deduct your inventory, you have your gross profit at that point. That's where you're going to be taxed. You can't take any other deductions after that. It's never been repealed, it's never been overturned or changed at this point. So it's still sitting on the books, and that's kind of created this unique environment that we're in right now where you have the federal government that's trying to kind of catch up a little bit if they decide they want to catch up, to understand that. And there's been some bills and things that are in place to try to make that happen. It's as with anything, it's sitting in committee. It'll sit in committee for a while. But that's what basically happened at that point and why that structure is there. So it just comes down to the Internal Revenue Code, and that's what they say. And you have a lot of people that they want to pay their taxes. I mean, most people that I've talked with, they want to report this stuff. They're not happy with it. I don't want to talk for Steve and Rachel, but I know they,
we love paying taxes.
I know you love paying taxes.
April 15th is like a favorite day.
So it's a unique environment which you have the federal government that kind of doesn't support it from that standpoint. But believe me, they're probably happy to get these, I shouldn't say checks, they're happy to get the cash, I guess, in terms of when it comes in or the checks that are there. So.
Okay, we've got another back here.
I'm Ryan. I really appreciate you guys coming out tonight. My question is, what's the average cost to open up a shop? And if you do open up a shop, do growers, will they give you on credit? Would be my second question. And I had a third question, but I just lost it.
Was the question, what's the average cost to open up a shop?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say
Our
that's,
retail shop?
Retail?
Okay.
yeah, it'd be totally dependent upon where you were and, what kind of rent you had to pay for your space and how much you threw into, getting it ready, I suppose, what kind of remodeling job and all that. Mm-hmm. So that'd be pretty variable, I guess.
The sky's the limit.
In terms of credit, we are not allowed to extend credit in Washington State. Washington State's an old blue progressive state, and the liquor control system was up until very recently was under tight state control. And you always had to pay cash when you delivered the liquor because they didn't want any, hanky-panky, I guess. And so they continued that when they put cannabis in because they put it into the same liquor control board to regulate cannabis. So it's cash on the barrelhead kind of deal.
What about getting the product in? I mean, what's the average cost of getting your product in started?
Well, it's changed dramatically. As Justin was saying, at the very beginning of, July, of what, 2014?
2014.
2014, I guess, 2014. It was quite high because there was a shortage of growers that had product available, and the demand was pretty good from the stores. So it was ranging, I would say, probably from $9 to $12 a gram delivered. And now it's fallen quite a bit. It's kind of stabilized over the last 5 or 6 months, but I would guess it's $2.50 to $3, $3.50, $4, somewhere in there a gram.
Great. Okay, we're over on this end. Everybody see us? Okay.
Hi, my name's Wendy. I just had a question. I'm interested in the security solutions that you have facing you. Running the gamut from loss prevention from your employees all the way to protecting your growth site. Is that a problem, and how do you handle that? Transporting cash, and I'm sure there's many sides to that security. If you could answer as many of those as possible, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, in Washington, for our grow operations and the retail locations, every square inch of our buildings are surveillanced by cameras. So, and we have to keep on file, I think it's 45 days worth of footage. So that does, I think, inhibit any loss prevention with employees. I'm speaking for Monkey Grass. We really haven't had any issues with that. We've been really fortunate to have very honest employees. And I think that the camera system helps a little bit because they know, like, if anything goes missing, all we have to do is rewind that camera and we'll see it. Because it's literally every square inch, besides the bathroom. So, and I don't think we've had really any other issues as far as security-wise. We have had one break-in. We've been in operation for over 1.5 years. And we're located in a smaller, very safe town, and so we were actually quite surprised. The guys came in, cut a hole in the side of our warehouse. And we're in and out in under 5 minutes. Grabbed a bunch of plants, flowering plants, which they I don't think would have made any money off of because the plants weren't ready to be harvested. So the marijuana plant is actually pretty fickle. It is a weed, but taking it out of its normal cycle into a different environment really shocks it. So we've had one break-in, and they really didn't make out with much. So we've been lucky.
Well, we've had one theft, and it was one of the employees stealing a Hot Pocket from another employee's lunch bag. And we actually were able to figure out who did it, and rewinding the camera. Other than that, we haven't really had an issue. As far as cash goes, we're just very careful with it. It immediately goes to the bank, and we only have either our drivers or one of our partners handling it.
Yeah, what I found, a lot of these sites are pretty secluded in terms, at least in Washington, for growing. I mean, it's hard to know they're there unless you know they're there. I mean, I think I called Rachel at one point. I was trying to find their site, and I'm like, okay, I'm on this part of town, and they're saying, you're going to go past this, you'll see this building with this logo, we're right beside it, our building's unmarked. It's not like they have signs out front that say, we grow marijuana here, and we have tons of cash on hand. They're not really, I think the retail sites, they're a little bit more concerned with that. It has been unique in which most of the retail sites that I've talked to and what I've seen in terms of just news stories and things like there hasn't been a lot of robberies in terms of the retail stores. They have pretty strong security in place. Even when you come into a store, a lot of them have it where it's almost to me like if you were to go to a jewelry store in a certain city, and I don't want to say a bad end of town, but where you walk in which the door behind you locks and you have a door in front of you that's then locked also. Somebody has to buzz you in. If there's so many people that's inside the retail shop in terms of the main area, they won't let new customers in until certain customers have flowed out. You have one door that goes in, you have one door that goes out in a lot of these locations. With that, they are IDing every single person that comes through the door. That was kind of comical, in which to me you would have people that would come in that, there's a gentleman that was probably in his 70s that came in at one point, and the security guard at the front door said, "I need to see your ID," and he kind of chuckled. He goes, "I'm serious, I need to see your ID." He goes, "I don't care if you're 21, I don't care if you're 120, we need to ID everybody." A lot of these places, they don't want to risk losing their license and not ID somebody and have that be a regulatory agent coming through. There's cameras everywhere, there's safes everywhere. I mean, I've seen stories even in Colorado where certain entities have bought in old bank buildings to be able to have the vault and have those security measures in place. So yeah, I mean, they try to limit it, but really it's been interesting that you don't see as much theft there as, I mean, what you think you would see in terms of knowing that there is that cash on hand and there's also a product there that has some value to it.
And in Washington, product isn't just sitting out like a 7-Eleven or something, so it's all back behind a counter, locked up. I mean, so we're pretty fortunate that somebody can't just walk in and grab a bag and walk out. It's all very, very secure, so.
It was one of the really odd things, I gotta say, to start out. When we first started harvesting, we had all these people. I mean, we kind of didn't know exactly what to expect either, but we had a lot of product out there. We're bringing it in and drying it, and you've got these huge bins just filled with cannabis, with buds. And it was just so odd to look at and think, this was totally illegal until right now. Now it's everywhere here. But now, after a year of doing this, it's just a product. I mean, it's nothing unusual. It's just the one you happen to deal in. And so everybody's just kind of calmed down, and it's turned into like anything else, really. Nothing unusual that much about it anymore.
And going back to the tracking system too a little bit, it is unique because every plant actually has a barcode, or a lot of them have it where it's being tracked in a system. So there was one site I actually went to where they had a grid layout in terms of their outdoor operations. So it was unique that you'd have some that were sort of, the smaller plants in which it's not ready for harvest. It's not actually flowering yet at that point. A lot of people, I think the misconception is that the product comes from the leaves. It's not the leaves, it's actually the flower or the bud that's on the plant and what you're harvesting. But you would move it at different locations, and they would have a setup on their computer in which every time a plant moves, an individual plant, that barcode would be scanned, in which it would be moved to a new location and scanned again, and in their system it would show the locations of all the plants. So if a plant were all of a sudden to be missing or something, you're going to figure out pretty fast where it's at. Also in terms of just external security, there's fences that are required, there's blackout curtains, you can't actually see into these locations. If it's indoor, everything's locked down too. So it's not something you can just walk in. I mean, if you're going to do this, you've got to cut through a fence or cut through a building or scale the fence and do it. It's not easy. So.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to come up here, and then I see a gentleman in blue. I'm headed your way next. Yeah.
I'm Steve, and what type of legal entity do you operate as for tax purposes? What considerations were given for those selections? And have you been audited yet?
I didn't hear the last part, but.
Have you been audited by the Fed yet?
Oh, audited. Well, thankfully, no, not yet. We happen to be a C Corp, but I had an existing C Corp that I wanted to put it in because it was a clean corporation, and owning a significant amount of land, I wanted to be very careful, so I hived off the parcel that we were going to do in it, and I've kept all the business affairs completely separate because, of course, at the beginning, who knew? Who knew what the federal government might do if they got a mind to? So we keep it completely separate, very strictly separate from anything else we do.
I can't think of anything to really add. I mean, most of the, in terms of the setups, most of the entities have been set up as flow-through organizations. I think in terms of federal audits, that's one where there's going to be some issues there, obviously, for a lot of businesses because if they're cash heavy. You're probably going to have a lot of tax audits that are going to be happening. That's still fairly fresh, too, for the federal government to be figuring out. I think with anybody that's filed a tax return, if you've been audited or you've had what I call just a paper audit or a letter, there's normally a 4-year delay a lot of times with that stuff. So, with a lot of these states, they're still in their infancy. So in terms of the IRS actually doing an audit on it, that's probably going to be maybe coming in the next 2 years or so that you'll start seeing that. Sorry. So maybe I'll start seeing that, I don't know. But I mean, most of the innings are set up as flow-through innings. I think a lot of people set them up that way because they want to separate other businesses with this. I mean, I think it's even unique that you have people that are thinking about the litigation component of it, and that you have some farmers that own a lot of land already, And it's unique when you ask where they're growing and they say, well, they're actually leasing the land that they're growing on because they are at fear that the federal government could come in and take that land away. So they might have thousands of acres they're already growing on. They could easily take an acre of that to grow on, but they don't even want to risk that because they're afraid if they grow on 1 acre and it's attached with the rest of the farm, the federal government's going to come in and take that entire 1,000 acres. So that's, again, kind of another way to move around that people are trying to think about from a litigation standpoint.
Did you guys hear that?
So a little
It's
bit.
not so much if, but when you're
Yeah,
going to be audited.
I would say it's probably going to be the case. I think from a tax standpoint, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny from the federal government in this, in which it is still a Schedule I substance. They've not shown any signs right now that they want to go the same direction as these states that have legalized. There's been some memos that have come out from different legal entities in terms of the Department of Justice, from the IRS. But again, that's a memo. They haven't actually changed the law. So I think you're right. It's going to be a matter of just when. And I think most of these organizations that I've seen that have set up as a legitimate business, they're aware of that. They have records. They're kind of ready for that. And if it happens, they've got the backup for it.
Thank you.
Hi, Carl Schramm. Both of you mentioned pesticides at one point, and pesticides I think are also a unique situation where they're, the traditional chemistry is registered at the federal level as well as the state level. So I'm curious if you're using pesticides that are organic or if Washington laws are addressing the discrepancy there. And a follow-up to that is you also mentioned, Steve, the regulations and the number of regulations. Do you see regulators actually visiting your site more frequently than in your prior business, or is it just the threat of regulation that exists?
Oh, no, we've had quite a number of visits to our site. I think we've had 3 or 4 maybe 4 from the Liquor and Cannabis Board in the year and a half that we've been licensed. We've had the Department of Agriculture out a couple of times, mostly just because they wanted to see the Department of Agriculture in Washington State is starting to take over part of the program, in particular pesticide regulation in cannabis. And so they came out to talk to us and see how we were doing it, and they brought back other people every so often, not necessarily to regulate, but just as a discovery, I guess, to find out what people were doing and understand it. As far as the regulation of the pesticides, like I say, it's Washington State. We in our operation only use pesticides that are listed by the Organic Materials Review Institute, which is the certifying agency for materials used in organic agriculture. And Washington State has not wholesale adopted that list, but they've taken some chunks of it off and put it on an approved list along with a few other things. I don't know exactly what their criteria is, but apparently things that they believe to be safe and are allowed. And we actually had something, one of our warehouse guys got something added to the list the other day that so they've been pretty open to looking at new materials.
Yeah, the Department of Agriculture wants to work with us. You know, new products are coming online all the time, especially for cannabis. So they want to be aware of those things and add them to the list if they do meet those standards. So yeah, it's been good.
All right.
Great.
We have
All right,
time
thank
for
you.
maybe one more question. We'll see where we're at, but it's
Okay.
probably
Thanks.
the last question.
My name is Kevin Elkins, and I was wondering, without internships, how would someone learn about the industry and the opportunities with that industry if it becomes legalized in Ohio?
Without internships.
Yeah, with that, I think that's going to be an unknown if you're talking about the Ohio market. With that, if it were to pass, that's going to be the bridge that we're going to get to and have to cross it. A lot of the regulation in terms of the Ohio market has not actually even been set up yet. So it's hard to say what Washington's doing is going to be what Ohio does, or what Colorado does is going to be what Washington does. Because with that, if the issue were to pass, there'll be a commission put in place that would oversee that and create that regulation within a certain amount of time. So they have 90 days once it's created to actually put that regulation out. So that's going to be the big question mark of, what are the rules going to be in terms of internships, in terms of the 21 up. I would have to assume if it were to pass and the commission were to be put in place, it would be pretty close to what you see in Washington, Colorado, where that 21 up is going to stick. I haven't seen any states yet that have said we're okay with anyone under 21 being at these locations. But with the interning piece in terms of gaining experience, So the question is, how would you gain experience in this industry if you can intern in it? And
I'd move to a legal state and get a job.
and get a
grow.
job.
Because I'll tell you, there's going to be a lot of demand for people who actually know how to do this at scale. And those 10 investors or whatever, if they think they're just going to jump into it and suddenly grow acreage of this, they're going to have an interesting ride to do that. And they're definitely going to be wanting people that know what they're doing, and there aren't very many of those out there.
I think it's hard to find people that have experience and know how to do it, because as we've kind of joked that everybody likes to talk shop and everybody likes to make it like their bud is the best bud and their product's the best product, and what they do is fantastic, and that they play at music at night and it loves this type of music and it makes the THC content higher and whatever else, and good for them. So with that, there's an educational component that's going to have to come along with that, and it's unique. Even some of the people that I've met that are growing that have agricultural degrees from certain universities in which they're trying to figure this out also, because they've talked about how they've tried to investigate it from an education standpoint, and there's nothing really out there to do that. So yeah, there's a huge learning curve right now, but there's, at least in Ohio, that's an unknown, but I think if you want experience, you'd have to go to a legal state and find a job in which there's a lot of resumes, I guess, to make your resume look really good, because there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
So what time we have here? So we probably have time for one more question. So we got 8:52. We'll do this last one. We got one more we can do. If anybody has
One more
a big
really good
stumper they
one.
want to ask.
All right, all the way over here.
You guys were talking earlier about the tests they go through, regulatory device, like bacteria and all everything. You also mentioned THC. Is that like a level you have to be above, or like when you're doing THC tests, just make sure that it is or isn't?
Yeah, there's no requirement that you have any particular level. That's just for the consumer information and for the retailer to understand what he's buying.
Yeah, all the testing is on the packaging, the potency.
Yeah. Yeah, all that's marked. There is strict regulation in terms of what needs to go on the packaging when you buy it, and in terms of the THC content, and in terms of edibles, the amount of oil that's in it. That's definitely one of the big. States have played around with that, in which every state is very different in terms of what should actually go on the packaging and what should be reported. I mean, Colorado's even been a state where they seem like they've kind of tried to implement a lot of things, and then it's been fought pretty hard, and so that's kind of a line that a lot of people are trying to figure out right now. And I think, as they said earlier, it's evolving quickly in terms of what needs to be marked on the products. So that's another problem, is that you create these packages, you have the markings on them, and then you find out a month from now that's all changed, and then you have to get new packaging and other things with it. So.
Yeah, and one thing to add is, and Steve mentioned before, every 5 pounds of product we have to have tested, which sometimes can run us around $150 a lot. So it really adds up, and you don't see that in any other industry. Like the wine industry, I think that they do potency analysis maybe once a year on their products. So for us, we have to do it on every 5 pounds of product. So.
And you're in terms of scale, I mean, you're talking growers that are growing 1,000 pounds. I mean, in terms of a harvest. So, all right. With that, I would like to thank Steve and Rachel for being here. It's been fantastic. So, I'd like to give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. You guys have a beautiful campus, and have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
very
everybody
much.
for coming. Be safe getting home.